China, the so-called rising superpower, now faces a crisis that no amount of propaganda can cover up. The Buy Land movement isn't just a rebellion, it's a national mutiny led by a generation that's given up on China's grand illusions. Their message to Xi Jinping and the Communist Party: let it rot. For years, the CCP controlled the narrative with iron-fisted dominance, but now the very people who once fueled its rise are refusing to play along. Xi, used to bending the nation to his will, is scrambling as the country he worked so hard to build teeters on the edge. Can he stop the rot, or is the so-called great power crumbling before our eyes? Let's get into it. If you don't speak Mandarin, the official dialect of China, the first thing you probably need to know is what Bai Lan even means. The term Bai Lan translates to let it rot in English. Interestingly, this phrase originated as a basketball term, but has evolved into a powerful symbol of resignation among China's youth. In the context of basketball, the term letting it rot initially referred to a strategy where a team, recognizing it's inevitably going to have a losing season, would deliberately lose games to secure a better and higher draft pick. In the US, it's known as tanking, but in China, this concept has been adopted in a broader social context to describe a mindset of voluntary withdrawal from pursuing goals deemed unattainable or overly challenging. Believe it or not, this sentiment is nothing new in China. In fact, the Bai Lan movement is seen as an extension of the earlier Tangping, or lying flat, movement, which advocated for stepping back from intense competition and adopting a minimalist lifestyle. However, Bai Lan takes this attitude further by not only rejecting strenuous efforts, but also actively accepting and even embracing a deteriorating situation. In this sense, it's akin to other Chinese expressions like "to smash a cracked pot" or "dead pigs aren't afraid of boiling water," which convey a sense of abandoning hope or effort when faced with overwhelming adversity. Professor Yu Hai of Fudan University explains that while lying flat represents a passive acceptance of minimal goals, the Bai Lan implies a more negative stance, where individuals accept and resign themselves to worsening conditions as a form of self-protection in the face of intense societal pressures. This shift from passive to active resignation illustrates a deeper frustration and a coping mechanism that allows young people to shield themselves from criticism and the harsh realities of their circumstances. This movement doesn't share many similarities with something like the Gen Z-led Myanmar civil war, where armed conflict and intense violence characterized the struggle for change. So you might wonder, how do we even know about this movement? The answer is simple: social media. The Bai Lan sentiment gained immense traction through platforms like Weibo and Xiaohongshu, China's Twitter and Instagram-like social media networks. In March 2022, the term Bai Lan rapidly rose in popularity, amassing over 91 million views on Weibo in just 6 months. This kind of widespread engagement in China, where the government frequently censors trends that challenge the status quo, underscores just how significant the issue has become. Similarly, on Xiaohongshu, users have embraced the Bai Lan lifestyle by sharing photos that depict rest, fatigue, and sadness under hashtags like #tired, promoting everyday decadence and collective resignation. With more than 2.3 million results for similar hashtags, it's clear that the Bai Lan movement has struck a chord with many. But why? What has made China's youth just give up on any success and accept being ordinary? The answer to this question lies in a complex mix of economic pressures, social expectations, and systemic frustrations, a mix that has made the promises of the Chinese dream, a vision of prosperity and success through hard work, feel increasingly out of reach for China's youth. Professor Alfred Wu of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy gets even more specific. He attributes the Bai Lan movement to the burden of 3 mountains: education, healthcare, and housing. With this in mind, let's break down all the reasons fueling the let it rot mindset in China. The number one reason behind this mindset, and arguably the underlying cause of many of the other reasons, is the profound sense of economic uncertainty. Basically, young Chinese adults are increasingly confronted with an unpredictable economic landscape that undermines their ability to plan for the future. Sal Hang, a Beijing-based creative professional, illustrates this with his own experience. In his words, "Unlike my parents' generation, young Chinese today have much bigger expectations, but there are many more uncertainties for us too. For example, we cannot make any long-term plans for our lives anymore, because we do not know what's going to happen to us even 5 years down the road. Worst of all, this uncertainty has permeated virtually every aspect of their lives, from job prospects to financial stability necessary for achieving long-term goals in their personal and professional lives. For instance, many young professionals are unable to make long-term career plans because they simply can't predict whether the industry will grow or shrink. The rapid changes in economic conditions, including recent economic slowdowns and policy shifts, compound these challenges. Now let's break down each of these factors contributing to the economic instability that has led to a sense of futility and resignation among the youth of China. As far as the recent economic slowdowns go, they primarily have to do with the COVID-19 pandemic. During the lockdowns, China's economy experienced a severe downturn. Hundreds of millions of people were confined to their homes, disrupting normal economic activities and leading to a dramatic contraction in various sectors. Take the hospitality and service industries as an example. Obviously, these industries rely on consumer spending. As such, they were hit hard by restrictions. These and similar scenarios made the world's second-largest economy, with a gross domestic product (GDP) of $14.7 trillion at the time, grapple with reduced consumer activity and global supply chain disruptions. These in turn caused economic growth to slow and new opportunities to dwindle. So not only did the COVID-19 pandemic expose the vulnerabilities of China's existing economic structure, but it also amplified feelings of helplessness among young people who saw their career prospects diminish as the economy faltered. If you think about it, their train of thought was rather logical. If they couldn't find a job before, when the economy was booming for the most part, how could they possibly hope to find one now, amidst the wreckage of a global pandemic and economic collapse? They couldn't. That's why they decided to let it all rot. Another factor that contributed to the decision and the overall economic instability was the unexpected policy changes in the private tutoring sector in China. Let us explain. Until quite recently, private tutoring was a booming industry in China, with companies like New Oriental Education expanding at an unprecedented rate. In 2004, New Oriental reported that the educational market in China was valued at approximately $72 billion. This massive sector employed around 10 million people, thus immensely contributing to economic growth and providing numerous job opportunities. But fast forward to 2021, and the Chinese government decided to impose severe restrictions on the sector. Now you're probably wondering, why would they possibly do that? The official narrative was that the government aimed to alleviate the academic pressure on students and reduce the financial burden on families. The new regulations practically banned for-profit tutoring for school subjects, prevented tutoring companies from raising funds, and even barred them from listing on stock exchanges. Unsurprisingly, this crackdown absolutely decimated the private tutoring industry. Within 10 months, New Oriental Education saw an 83% drop in its market value. Other top tutoring companies experienced an average 90% loss in value, leading to widespread layoffs, reaching up to 50% of a company's workforce. As many as 200,000 employees lost their jobs across the top 7 private tutoring companies alone. So the destruction of the private tutoring sector not only resulted in immediate job losses, but also created long-term uncertainty for those involved and even those not involved. An industry as robust and integral as private tutoring being dismantled overnight left many questioning the stability of their own employment and investments. Simply put, this seismic shift amplified a pervasive sense of instability and distrust in the Chinese economic environment, feeding into the growing sentiment of disillusionment among the younger generation, as well as resentment towards those who directly enforce these policies, the CCP. The final factor contributing to the ever-growing sense of economic instability is the alarming youth unemployment rate in China. In April of 2023, this rate reached a record high of 20.4%, and it only continued growing from there. By June 2023, the youth unemployment rate increased to 21.3%. So what did the Chinese government do? Did it roll out economic stimulus packages? Did it create job programs? Or perhaps invested in sectors with high unemployment potentials? No, it just suspended the publication of urban youth unemployment figures. Yeah, you heard that right. It's the good old Chinese approach of controlling the narrative rather than addressing the root of the problem. That's why even with a new system of record-keeping introduced in December 2023, the dangerously high unemployment rate couldn't remain hidden from the public eye. In July 2024, it reached the highest level since the new system was introduced, 17.1%. But what gives? Why, despite the government's attempts to conceal the gravity of the situation, does this problem persist? The answer lies in the deep structural issues within the Chinese economy itself. As the job market becomes increasingly saturated, with 11.8 million university graduates entering the workforce in 2024 alone, there simply aren't enough job opportunities to match the influx. Basically, the Chinese economy is struggling to provide sufficient employment for a generation that was promised prosperity through hard work, leaving them trapped in a cycle of rising expectations but diminishing returns. However, to be fair, even young Chinese people who did manage to land a job aren't necessarily thriving. Many of them find themselves trapped in the grueling 996 work culture, which is another major reason behind the Buy Land movement. So what's the 996 work culture? It's a punishing schedule where employees work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week, equating to a staggering 72 hours of work each week. That's 72 hours in a world where a 40-hour work week is the accepted standard globally. Despite being technically illegal under China's labor laws, which mandates that full-time employees are restricted to working a 44-hour week, the 996 approach is a widely accepted norm, especially in competitive industries like tech, finance, and manufacturing. And here's the kicker. Despite these insane hours, most workers aren't seeing the rewards of their hard labor. Instead, they're drained, underpaid, and stuck in jobs that offer little to no upward mobility. On top of that, they're often burdened with unrealistic performance targets set by superiors, which simply cannot be met, even with their best efforts. This toxic environment has fueled the byland mindset, with more young people simply opting to drop out of the so-called rat race altogether, choosing to let it rot rather than be ground down by an unforgiving system. With this in mind, it's no wonder China's youth are turning back on traditional success narratives. Why keep pushing when the system itself is designed to wear you out? But let's leave the job field for a second. How do other aspects of life affect the byland movement? Well, they fuel it too, that's how. Young Chinese adults are turning their back on major life milestones that were once considered essential for a stable, successful future. Marriage rates have plummeted, falling by nearly 56% over the last decade. Birth rates hit a record low of 6.39 births per 1,000 people in 2023, down from a rate of 6.77 births in 2022. Even homeownership, once a critical goal for young people in China, has become an unattainable dream for many. Why? Because property prices in China are simply too expensive. Housing prices in major cities like Shanghai and Beijing have skyrocketed, now costing approximately 12 times the average annual income. And since this inflation makes homeownership impossible for many young people, they've decided to simply reject the societal pressures to buy property altogether. And trust us when we say it, there are huge pressures to do so. You see, in China, the pursuit of property ownership is often linked to social status, and it's deeply ingrained in cultural expectations. Owning a home isn't just about having a place to live. It's seen as a marker of personal success, family stability, and even a prerequisite for marriage. That's why parents often push their children to buy a property, even contributing financially, because home ownership signifies maturity and financial security in the eyes of society. Well, at least it did. Now it's just another thing the Chinese youth is letting rot. The final piece of the puzzle contributing to this growing mentality is the rising healthcare costs in China. Based on everything you've heard so far, this next fact shouldn't be too surprising. China has one of the fastest growing aging populations in the world. By 2040, the population of people over 60 in China is expected to reach a staggering 28%, primarily due to declining fertility rates. And what does an aging population mean? That's right, healthcare costs going up. As the proportion of elderly people grows, so does the need for healthcare services and pensions, thus placing additional pressure on the already struggling economic framework. With fewer young people entering the workforce and an increasing number of retirees, the economic imbalance becomes even more pronounced, exacerbating the sense of disillusionment among China's youth. Many young people are worried about even getting enough support when they're older, which only reinforces the byland attitude, as the only alternative is the overwhelming prospect of having to secure substantial financial resources for the future. As you can probably guess, this option is out of reach for many. So let's do a quick tally. The young people in China can't get a job, and if they do, they're trapped in a horrific work culture with little to show for their efforts. They don't know what the future holds, so they often choose not to get married or have kids. Home ownership is nothing but a distant dream for them due to skyrocketing property prices. And China's aging population threatens to drain resources they might need in the future. In other words, they're left with virtually nothing. Nothing to own, and more importantly, nothing to lose. Now, why does this scare Xi and the CCP so much? Because a generation that feels disillusioned and disenfranchised poses a serious threat to the stability and cohesion of the Chinese state. When young people feel they have nothing to lose, they become more susceptible to dissent and radical ideologies. This might lead them to question the legitimacy of the CCP's rule, reject its promises of prosperity, and even challenge its authority. In a society where political stability is paramount and dissent is tightly controlled, this kind of widespread apathy and disaffection is nothing short of alarming. It directly undermines the CCP's ability to maintain social harmony and could spark unrest or movements that challenge the existing political order. So what are the CCP and its leader doing to prevent this? Initially, the CCP reached for its go-to crisis tactics: censorship and media propaganda. The government intensified its efforts to control digital platforms and suppress any rights of brewing dissent. So popular internet forums such as Douban saw the removal of all groups associated with the Bailan sentiment, some of them with thousands of members. Of course, this crackdown directly reflected the CCP's broader strategy of controlling online discourse and preventing the spread of rebellious ideas. Just for good measure, the government threw some good old media propaganda into the mix. State media have actively addressed the Bailan movement with nothing but critical narratives. At best, the media has portrayed this movement as having a defeatist mindset. At worst, it was slammed as shameful and a complete opposite of the ideals of perseverance and struggle promoted by the government. As the Southern Daily newspaper, published by the CCP, put it, "Struggle is a kind of happiness. Choosing to lie flat in the face of pressure is not only unjust, but also shameful." But here's the thing. The Chinese youth just don't care about the government's critiques or attempts to reframe their disillusionment. They aren't following the Bailan movement to send some kind of message or provoke a reaction. They truly feel abandoned and resigned. Seeing that no amount of media propaganda or censorship could mitigate these feelings, the CCP switched gears, trying a new approach to quell this unique rebellion. President Xi himself has taken a more direct hand in addressing the issue. In a major speech in May of 2022, Xi tackled the Bailan movement with a multifaceted approach. First, he sent out a public plea for unity, urging the Chinese youth to align their personal aspirations with the broader goals of national rejuvenation, emphasizing their critical role in China's future. Then he tried to revive their optimism, calling for the young people to strive for great ideals, once again stressing that China's hope lies in youth. Xi also addressed the concerns more head-on. He promised to tackle areas like employment, entrepreneurship, and social integration, suggesting that the CCP would listen to the youth and correct any mistakes. Then he shifted the responsibility right back to the youth, urging them to tackle hardships and uphold moral values, positioning these efforts as crucial for the vitality of socialism with Chinese characteristics. And finally, Xi emphasized the strategic importance of nurturing the next generation, calling for the creation of more favorable conditions for its development and innovation. But again, he snuck another call to action into his address, encouraging the youth to contribute to global Chinese campaigns like the Belt and Road Initiative. On the surface, this address might seem promising, but the problem is that the CCP often falls short in practice. All these promises and reassurances are bound to crumble under the weight of reality as the party's glossy rhetoric collides with the harsh truths of unfulfilled hopes and mounting discontent. Still committed to maintaining absolute power, the CCP saw only one way to ensure its grip on the nation: the construction of a formidable internal security apparatus. After all, China has quite a history of internal strife and rebellion for such an authoritarian state. So the party's new strategy obviously reflects a deep-seated fear of history repeating itself. But what parts of this history worry the CCP the most? The parts that led to several bloody protests and a few potential clashes that were eventually avoided. The government's increasingly stern response to the Bailan movement should be viewed in the context of these past uprisings. Number one is undoubtedly the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989. This is the single most haunting spectre in the CCP's closet, a brutal reminder of the devastating cost of dissent. During this event, which is also known as the June 4th incident, the party unleashed a ruthless military crackdown involving the People's Liberation Army and the People's Armed Police on peaceful protesters demanding political reform, resulting in at least 10,000 deaths. According to state-run media, tens of soldiers, armed police, and Beijing municipal police were also killed during this event, with another 6,000 injured. However, later studies found that only 15 fatalities among Chinese soldiers and armed police could be 100% verified. To make matters worse, any public commemoration or even mention of this horrific event is still strictly prohibited in China. That's the CCP's MO. Suppress the past, control the present, and quash any flicker of dissent before it can ignite into a blaze. Some of the other events that gained notable attention but were ultimately suppressed include the Falun Gong crackdown in 1999, aimed to eliminate this spiritual practice in China. This event resulted in at least 5,600 arrests, up to 50,000 detentions, and widespread torture. The JASIC labor movement in 2018, which protested against labor conditions at a factory owned by JASIC Technology. The government responded with dozens of arrests designed to crush the movement's momentum. The Urumqi fire protests in 2022, sparked by a deadly fire that killed 10 people and exposed the brutal impact of stringent COVID-19 lockdowns. These protests spread rapidly across cities but were met with severe repression, including mass detentions and increased security measures to silence dissent and maintain order. Given its track record with disillusioned and angry citizens, the CCP understands what kind of instability these individuals can cause. That's why its last attempt to stifle dissent before it can turn into a full-on mutiny and disrupt the party's grip on power is also the most drastic one, an unprecedented expansion of its internal security apparatus. First, let's see which key components this complex network consists of. Number 1. The Ministry of Public Security, or MPS for short. The MPS is the backbone of civilian law enforcement in China. As such, it's tasked with maintaining public order, countering riots, and preventing terrorism. Basically, this ministry is the first line of defense against domestic unrest and political activism. Number 2. The Ministry of State Security, or MSS. The MSS functions as China's primary intelligence and counterintelligence agency. It's responsible for protecting national security, combating espionage, and suppressing activities deemed to threaten the CCP's rule. Number 3. People's Armed Police, or PAP. The PAP is essentially a paramilitary force under the direct control of the Central Military Commission, the highest national defense organization in China. The PAP is tasked with internal security and maritime protection, as well as responding to emergencies and supporting the People's Liberation Army during conflicts. Number 4. The People's Liberation Army, also known as the PLA. While traditionally focused on national defense, the PLA has increasingly taken on internal security roles. China's 2020 National Defense Law even explicitly states that the PLA's mission is to consolidate the CCP's leadership and socialist system. And number 5. The militia. The Chinese militia operates alongside the PLA and supports various missions, from disaster relief to internal security. It plays a crucial role in augmenting the army's capabilities, especially in times of crisis. As you can see, the CCP's strategy for maintaining control is quite comprehensive and multifaceted. Each component of this internal security apparatus plays a distinct yet complementary role in safeguarding the regime's power. Together they form an intricate web of surveillance, enforcement, and military readiness designed to anticipate and neutralize any threats to the party's dominance. However, in recent years, Xi has paid special attention to one of these components, the PLA. Xi has essentially restructured the PLA and its related forces to better address internal security concerns, marking a strategic shift from a focus on external military prowess to reinforcing the regime's domestic control. This restructuring included the creation of the Information Support Force, which focuses on enhancing the PLA's capabilities in cyber warfare, information operations, and electronic surveillance, areas crucial for maintaining internal stability. There has also been a renewed focus on the so-called intelligentized warfare, which integrates advanced technologies like artificial intelligence and data analytics to predict, identify, and counter internal threats with unprecedented precision. Xi also integrated the PAP's operations with other security components, thus effectively consolidating the entire internal security apparatus. He also expanded the militia's role beyond disaster relief and support, signaling one thing: the CCP would use all available resources to suppress dissent and manage crises. Now, you might think all of these reforms and moves might be overkill for a movement that is essentially comprised of young people giving up on success, letting it all rot. But here's the thing about rot: it never stays contained. It spreads, it festers, and it undermines everything it touches, even things that might seem untouchable. Unsurprisingly, trying to stop this rot with the very same strategies that caused it in the first place hasn't yielded the desired results. Instead, it's only deepened the crisis, as the same repression and control measures that failed to address the underlying issues continue to alienate and frustrate the Chinese populace. The disillusionment has only intensified, making the rot more pervasive and harder to contain, and sending Chinese society to the brink of collapse. But will the Bailan movement manage to push the CCP over the edge, turning into a full-blown revolution, or will it suffer the same, or even worse fate, as past uprisings, as Xi remains determined to use every tool at his disposal to crush dissent? Leave your predictions in the comment section below, and thank you for watching the video. Now go and check out Top Chinese Military Humiliations, or click this other video instead.